In other words, Chet says you need searing truth. And what you do is you use anesthesia with your words.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah. He says, just say it how it is. And stop saying, just between us. What is there, you know, you're living two lives, Kary. You're living the life that people, like he'd just call you out, man. He'd pick up these things and just call you out. So he calls me one day. I'm in the pastor's office, right? And I pick up the phone. It's Chet. And he's like, hey. And the moment I got it, I walked outside because I'm like, I don't know. There's people, there's cameras in the room. They're going to hear me. And he says, I just saw you speaking online somewhere. He's like, you just traveled somewhere to speak and there's pictures. He says, does the church know? I said, yeah, I got Rick's permission, my senior pastor. He's like, what does he think? I said, he's cool with it. He's like, what does your wife think? I'm like, she's cool with it. And he's like, what does God think? And I'm like, I don't know. What does God think? And he's like, listen, listen to me. He's like, listen to me. He's like, you're full of crap. He says, you are playing a game where you are too scared to make a move in your life. And you are using the church's dollar. And you're telling everyone on your speeches to live bold. And you are scared to death to step out. And he said, you can't take the ring and stay in the Shire. Then he says, call me back when you grow a pair. Boom. And guess what?
What?
Within 24 hours, I was talking to my senior pastor after 11 years of being in that church. And I said, I'm done. Because he was right. He was totally right. I was too scared to go all in at the age of 35 with a kid 6, 4, and 2.
Wow. What was the quote again, Kary?
You can't take the ring and stay in the Shire.
Yeah, the other one. If most people want, but they try to fit in, that one.
Something like most people want to stand out, but unfortunately, they desperately just try to fit in.
What's crazy is that when you were saying that, the words that were going through my head and what your story beautifully articulated is that Chet just said, hey, if you want to stand out, you need to stand up.
That's good.
And I'm really curious, Kary, in your story, a lot in the story. And by the way, I think this resonates with everyone, whether they actually admit it or not, is fear, uncertainty, scared, is something that you have learned to almost transmute, like alchemize into these little growth periods, like these growth of like who you are.
Yeah.
I think of like a tree, right? You added a ring onto like your trunk of who you are. How does that currently live in your life? Like, what are the things you're scared of now?
Well, 2 years ago, I'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about right now. 2 years ago, I was scared to say yes to Cedarville because I knew I would have a boss again.
Yeah, and for the audience, can you give them just a little background? What is Cedarville, and why is that a big deal for you?
Cedarville's a university that the craziest thing in the world is 20 years ago, in 2005, when I knew I didn't want to be a pastor, but I didn't know what I wanted to be. But I was a pastor at that time, trying to get out. I applied to be the Bible professor at Cedarville, and they rejected me. So they rejected me 20 years ago. And then I'm like, well, thanks, God. I don't want to be a pastor. I try to be a professor. I'm trying to be an author. It's like closed door. So anyway, then I became an entrepreneur finally in 2012 when Chet called me out. And then 2 years ago, I'm at a Christmas party. Forgot about Cedarville, although we had gone on a college visit 2 months before for my son. And we're like, where do you want to go to college? And he said, I want to go to Cedarville because mom went there, and I think I want to go there. So we're like, well, that's cool. So that was October. And then December, I'm at a Christmas party, and a Cedarville professor was there, small Christian university. He says, "What do you do?" I said, I love entrepreneurs." He's like, "Oh my gosh, we've been looking for an entrepreneur chair for 2 years. Do you want to be the guy?" And I'm like, "No, I want to be an entrepreneur." I said I applied 18 years ago at the time. But anyway, long story short, Ben, through some conversations of me knowing who I was and saying, okay, maybe I'm supposed to invest in my son's life, and then my daughter's life, and then my next daughter's life, because we get free tuition. So they're all going to go there. But I thought, this is a way I can remain in my kid's life, but I can start pouring into the next generation of entrepreneurs. But I said to them, but I'm not leaving my companies. And if that doesn't work, I'm not your guy. So that took a lot of guts, man. Like, I feel like the older I've gotten, the more I'm like clear on who I am. Kind of like you.
Yeah.
Pre-show, we were just chatting about some details with your life, and like, you know who you are now.
Yes.
You know what is right. And so the sooner that happens, I honestly think the sooner life can adjust to you.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. 100%. It's interesting that talk about a rebuke. You said, "Hey, I'm going from being a pastor, natural sort of transition, to being a professor in biblical studies," right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but it's almost a parabolistic in the fact of you had to have your 40 days
Oh yeah.
in the wilderness. And Daniel White, who's a friend of ours, he and I were having a conversation about my own journey. And he was talking about, he goes, you know why you don't pour new wine into old wineskins?
Because it will burst.
Because it'll burst. And he said, you have to pour new wine into new wineskins that will expand with it. And I think that so often, Kary, when I'm listening to you talk about, the wine that you tried to pour into, like, you're kind of this new wine into this old, it wasn't going to work, that you needed to actually expand your own wineskin.
Yeah.
And I find that really, really intriguing. Talk to me a little bit about, what are the things that scare you now? And the reason why I ask that is that I feel that you have a great relationship with telling the truth, right? Like, Chet challenged you, "Hey,
Yeah.
tell the damn truth," right? And the biggest thing is to yourself, which quite honestly is really telling the truth to God, right?
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about that. What are the things that for you now? I mean, you're this incredibly successful published author. You've published so many different books, right? You've created, I think, in one of like the greatest IP innovations that the world has seen, and allowing everyday people to capture their thoughts and make them into actual property. Yet my guess is you're not done.
No.
So what are the things for you right now are kind of on the front burner where you go, man, this scares me?
Oh man. If you and I were just having a chat, I could go very deep into this, but this will be shared with the world. So that's why I'm a little hesitant. But offline, I'll share anything you want. But for now, on this podcast,
what would Chet say?
Chet would say, "Don't share it on a podcast." No, I'm kidding. I think right now, look, you can have the most success when it comes to business. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And I think that relationships, is where my next frontier is.
Come on.
Oh yeah. So, I mean, I've done a lot of, like, I'm not the type of guy to ever read a relationship book. Just being real. Like, I'm the strength, I'm the strength finder. I'm the strength finder. Oh my gosh, you would think this is fun. Like, Ben, I come off pretty relational, I think.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not like your dude who doesn't have relationships, but I feel like I am hardwired for output, success, achievement, ambition. And so my strength finders are all like really low relation. And
Yep.
so, I've my biggest win this last week was me spending time with Keegan,
Yeah.
like my son, who's 19.
Great young man, by the way.
Yeah.
Great young man.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that there's relationships in my life that to go to the next level, I want to go, but not everyone always wants to go.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing is like, you can have, everybody who's listening might be like, well, that would be the relationship with my mom or my dad or my spouse or my kid
Yep.
or whatever. But when you are hardwired for transformation and not everyone around you is, what do you do?
Ooh.
That's my question. Is like, that's a tough question, man.
What's your gut tell you, Kary? Because one of the things having been around you a bunch is that I think you have incredible intuition. I mean, I've seen it when I hear you listening to a person who doesn't even know they need to be an author, and they just start speaking, and you're like, that.
Oh, it was with your 16 days, man. I knew when we were in the workout room and you're
Yeah.
talking, I'm like, that's your book, man. But yeah, I think I do have a spiritual gift of seeing the future, not in a weird way. I certainly can't predict like stocks or anything crazy like that, but I do think it's ideas. I think I can see the outcome of ideas. And even when I can't, I can have a high level of gut trust.
Yeah.
So here's my thought. There's a new death and resurrection that's in my future.
Ooh.
Oh yeah.
Ooh. Ooh.
Oh yeah.
Gives me shivers.
Well, every time I think that I have nothing left to grow or nothing left to give, or I've given it all. Oh my gosh, like I've given it all. 3 years ago, I had a death, and that was, hey, we need to take Igniting Souls and rethink the whole thing. And I had this big thing called a tribe. I don't know if you know this, Ben, but I would have these big Igniting Souls conferences. You could say I had a business partner, although he wasn't officially a business partner. Anyway, there were key people and things in my life. And there's this parable, or not a parable, it's actually a story in the Bible. Everyone's probably heard of it. God takes Abraham and he says, look, this son that you got, this like cherished thing that you love, I want you to take it up on the mountain and tie it to the altar and take out a knife, and I want you to kill it. And I'll tell you what, it so that we keep this podcast not rated whatever it's called, where you get the little explicit. There's sometimes where we look at God and say like, F you, God, like, no way. I'm not doing that, because that's way too deep, precious. And God's like, do you love that or do you love me? And I think there's been times in my life where I've been like, no, I love that thing too much.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes God either says, fine, you either love that thing or you go with me. And going with God in that new adventure where you have to kill the thing, that's like crazy. And so I feel like the next thing that God's calling me to, I honestly can't name it, but I feel like I'll name it to you offline. But I feel like that's the next step, man. And it's crazy. And it's like you wouldn't even think it. And it's like the next thing.
Well, that's I so appreciate you sharing that, because I think all of us, myself included, and my guess is as people are listening to that, they're thinking about what are the sacred cows in their life that make them feel confident, but it's like you and I are both cyclists, right? When you're going up a hill and you think it's flat, but we call it a false flat because you
Yes.
think that it's flat, but you're still going uphill and it's still struggling.
Yes.
And it's like the saying, you're losing so slowly you think you're winning.
Oh, wow. That's deep.
And I think that a lot of people, this is really going to resonate with, because we all have these sacred cows.
Mm.
And I'm curious, you and I both were at a conference in Arizona earlier this week, and someone had stood up and said and said this quote: "If it doesn't challenge you,
Doesn't change you.
it doesn't change you."
Yep.
And how have you accepted? I mean, going back to 10, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about adversity and challenge. I mean, that could have defined you. That self-injury
Yeah.
could have defined you. You could have went, "Hey, this is who I am. I'm a survivor of this." But instead you kept moving forward. Um, how have you continued to do this? Like, and still get to the top of the mountain and go like, "You know what? Like, you're crazy."
Yeah. Well, I always think that the mountain, I've gotten there, and then you get to the mountain and you realize you can just see further and there's no mountain. So the only option is to quit. I can't quit. I honestly thought back in the day when things really got bad, 17, 18 years old, and I was really thinking about suicide. I thought, I'll get to heaven, because I knew I'd get to heaven because I was trusting in Christ, not my own self.
Yeah.
And so I knew I'd get to heaven, and I would have said, "Okay, God, I'm here." And I thought God would say, "You're early." And then he would say, "Hey, look at what I had planned for you." And then he would pull back the curtain, and I couldn't see this now. But I knew there was something behind the curtain. And so the thought of like skipping that to quit, because that's what I think suicide is. I think suicide is quitting. Suicide is saying it's too tough. And the way I've overcome mental health, because I haven't struggled with self-injury now for 20 plus, I'd say 25 years. Last time was 22, 23. And I went to counseling, and, medicine really didn't help me. It was some deep work. It was like saying, I'm going to take all my self-injury and put it on God, because I thought God wanted a perfect person, and I couldn't handle imperfection. So I was like, fine, I'll just punish myself. And then what I did is my freedom then came through it's a certain type of psalm in the Bible. It scares the church people. There's this group of psalms that scares the church people, scares the pastors, scares the theologians. They're called the imprecatory psalms. These are the psalms. Again, a psalm is just David. It's David's journal. David's journaling some crazy stuff. Okay. He's journaling, "May you take my enemies and blot them out of the book of life," which translation says, "May you take my enemies and send them to hell." And that's in the Bible. I'm like, that's pretty interesting. I've never sang that song before. And then he's got another one, "May you make my enemies' wives widowless or widows." And I'm like, so David's like ripping to shreds all of his enemies in the journal. And he's like questioning God. And then God says later on that David's a man after his own heart. And that like blew my mind. I'm like, how can a man after God's own heart essentially cuss God out, rip him to shreds, and say that he hates his enemies? And I'm like, that is what spirituality is. Spirituality is authenticity.
Ooh, come on.
Yes. It's not wearing the mask, singing the hymn. You and I talked about dropping something in the offering. It's authenticity about who you really are and how you're really messed up. And then saying, "And I need God." And that is why Jesus can say, like, Blessed are the poor in spirit, which is meaning, it literally means the spiritually bankrupt. Blessed are the spiritually bankrupt, for they will inherit the kingdom. It's like, so I feel like not in a, but I feel like in a real way, I'm going to another level of spiritual bankruptcy where I'm like, all right. And I feel it and it freaks the crap out of me. But it's like, cause you got nothing. Like there's people who talk a big game. Oh, I gave up everything, but when you have nothing, like you literally have nothing.
What I love about what you did is also give the permission, because oftentimes questioning, whether it's in terms of spirituality, it's yourself, it's your relationships, it's your purpose, is that there's discomfort when you question.
Yes.
And I think that questioning is really the form of you starting to stand up.
That's big. Like Neo in the Matrix.
Yes.
Like, what the
Yes.
crap? Something's going on here. Yeah.
And I think about entrepreneurially, many people who are listening to this are going to be entrepreneurs, and is that it's the J curve, right?
Tell me more.
You know,
Like the hockey stick?
yeah, the hockey stick, in terms of that there's typically discomfort. And I think about if there's a line here across, straight across. And my example of this is that when my son Benny was born, and 16 days later, so for many listeners, that's why Kary was talking about 16 days, is that 16 days later, he died. And it what that 16 days taught me is that Newton's law is real, equal and opposite reactions. And that oftentimes when you stand up and you do the hard things, is like, if you think of the J curve, is that typically the J curve is the sign that in terms of it goes down before you go up. You actually you actually regress before you actually move forward here.
Wow.
And one of the groups I was coaching, groups of entrepreneurs I was coaching, they're like, that's like the Benny principle, because he said, in terms of, for me, it was like, I had to feel that sorrow before I actually felt that joy. And I reflect in terms of like what you're talking about here, is that you've had so many instances of where you felt fear,
naked. Yeah, everything.
but these were all of the things that were the precursors in that J curve before you actually then elevated, because you had to face them before you could stand up. I think that is just so beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful when you're afterwards.
Yeah. Must be present to win.
Yeah, it's true. And but even your own journey with Benny, I mean, that was super tough. But I feel like you had to take some grieving.
Yeah.
And tell your audience, like, we were in the middle of a book of yours, and I really appreciate your wisdom, because I think this is a big testament to you. I mean, you had this great book and this great concept, and we were pretty much lined up, ready to roll, and you basically pulled the trigger, or you didn't pull the trigger, and you said, I'm out, because this book is no longer where I'm going. Dude, that's like a microcosm of what we're talking.
Yeah.
And you may know this, you may not, but this is a good little rant here. You made a decision. And the reason why your listeners right now, everybody, including me, we all have a decision that we're probably delaying right now. We know what we need to do. I mean, if someone literally said, Ben, you got 24 hours, you'd be like, pull the trigger, boom, make the decision. The word decide, think about the suffix: suicide, genocide, decide, insecticide, homicide. It all deals with the Latin word death. Decide is literally, the word decide means to cut off or kill. And so we've been told this lie our whole lives, which is, Ben, keep your options open. Kary, keep your options open. And what that is that's actually the worst advice ever, because we have limited power. You're an athlete, I'm an athlete. You have limited power, and what you do is you leak the power into all the possibilities. What if this thing's going to work? What if that thing's going to work? So you live in all these realities, which is actually a coping mechanism, so you don't have to show up in the pain.
Yes. Ooh.
Right. And so
Yeah.
what does a gardener do to something that has too many branches?
Prune.
They cut off or kill all the possibilities, which then is grieving. Like, this is why people don't want to make a decision, because they have to grieve the end.
I love that. I love that. I felt like Benny pruned a lot of things in my life, because when it came down to it, and the doctors had said to me, and my wife, Jenna, they said, so what do you want to do? We can keep him alive. And I remember just being how alive sort of felt like all of these, like it just came back down to is being alive, living, and this like filter. And so I think that it made it really, really clear that the first 42 years of my life, if I really was just being alive
Wow.
and living in the possibilities. And, as our friend Chris Johnson said, addicted to the potential. And I think that, there was like before Benny and after Benny. And the after Benny, really, that's why I had that conversation with you. I was like, the storyline, which was amazing, the book, which was amazing.
Yeah, it was.
And again, thank you to you and your incredible team of helping that come to life.
Oh, yeah.
I just didn't feel living. And Kary, when you think about the people who are sitting on decisions because they don't want to go through the grieving process, right? They don't want to go through the first portion of Newton's law, right? And typically, by the way, you don't go to joy first. Is that typically you go through discomfort, grief, sorrow. You decide. What advice would you give to those who are maybe sitting on that decision, who need to do some of that pruning? I
Yeah.
mean, you've had a lot of opportunities where you had to prune,
Oh, yeah.
or like the decision was going to be made for you.
So I'll go back to my friend Chet, and what he says is that this is good. Pain is inevitable. Misery is a choice. And let me unpack that. The person who's sitting on a decision is in chronic pain. Like, truth be told, Ben, right now, I'm in chronic pain. There's an area of my life where I'm in chronic pain. So would I rather be in the chronic pain, which is dull, under the surface, low-lying, might flare up once in a while, but it's tolerable? Or are you going to invite into your life the acute pain? Because the acute pain is going to hurt like heck. But it's intentional, it's short-term, and it's actually healthy. And so most people, honestly, it's the scene in the Matrix where he's sitting in the car, he's talking to Trinity. He's like, I'm out. This is too much. He opens the door, he looks down the alley, and Trinity says, you know where that road leads. You've been down there before. Get back in. And he gets back in. And like, it's the red pill, it's the blue pill. Like, this is it's the ring. This is the point where we all say, either put me back in the Matrix, like that dude Cypher, who's like, erase my brain. I don't care if this steak isn't real. I don't care if this harp isn't real. Anesthetize my brain, which is where most of the world is. Or I'm going to lean into the unknown.
I think a good maybe a good segue to talk about your journey to standing up, right? I mean, if you go check out Kary's socials, which as an aside, Kary, where can people find you on socials?
Yeah, so usually my name, my companies are also Igniting Souls and Instant IP.
Yeah. If you go there, you're going to see, man, how could this guy have chronic pain? How could this guy have had all of these things happen behind the scenes, like happen? And I think that's the reason why I wanted to have this podcast is for
Yeah.
people to really be able to see what's happening behind the mask, right? What's happening behind the title, behind the socials. And so I appreciate you sharing that, Kary. But can you share a little bit? I want to bring this back. You go to Cedarville, and in essence, they rebuke you, and you now have 3 kids, and you're going, now what? Talk to me about that journey, because you went from being someone of significance in a small tribe, right, in your church, to you're in the wilderness.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if people realize how scary that is. I had very little confidence, never had taken a business class in my life. The church administrator said to me, listen, man, I appreciate your passion. What are people going to pay you for? And I mean, he wasn't trying to be rude. He wasn't trying to be rude, but I mean, he literally verbalized what I thought, you know? Now, thankfully, my wife at the time said, Kelly, she said, hey, I believe in you, but just bring the paycheck. Which I think is good, because I think that there's the type of spouse who's just like, hey, honey, you can do anything, I knew, like, I'm giving up, not a big salary, but I'm giving up security.
Yes.
Giving up Christian school for my kids, health insurance, steady paycheck. But then when you're a pastor, you know this, Ben, like, because your dad was one.
Yep.
There's the friend group.
Yes.
There's the title. There's the what's really going on. Is he leaving the faith?
Yes.
Is
The
he
judgment.
greedy? Yeah, you only leave as a pastor for 2 reasons. You either stole money or you had an affair.
Yep. Or I would say the third one is you retire or you die.
Oh, yeah. There you go. There's 4. And then my dad was a pastor too, but I mean, I wasn't really addicted to his thoughts. I mean, he was cool with it. But but my father, her father-in-law, they're all like, what are you doing, man? What's your plan? Anyway, long story short, I got involved in I would say that the John Maxwell team gave me some belief. Because crazy story, I wrote a mentor online, who's a big dude. I could name his name. You would absolutely recognize him. I basically asked three people in the business world to mentor me, and I said, I will pay you to mentor me. I will fly to your city, and I just need to grow. I just need somebody to mentor. All of the dudes turned me down. And then all of a sudden, my friend says to me, hey, I work at the radio station. John Maxwell's coming to Ohio to speak. I got a free ticket. Do you want to go? And I'm like, no, I can't. Kelly's working, and I'm watching the kids. Anyway, long story short, my sister-in-law basically volunteered to watch the kids that day. So here I am, free ticket to John Maxwell. Kids are being watched, and I'm like ready to receive Ben. I'm like, God is going to give me a message at this event. So John speaks, and I'm like almost bawling, because I'm like,
Wow.
This guy gets growth. This guy gets ambition. I want to grow so much, and this guy gets it. And then at the end, he says, listen, this is not for everybody. The talk's over. But if you want to be mentored, I'm starting this thing called the John Maxwell team. It hasn't even started yet. We're starting a founders group. If you want more information, come up after. Dude, I ran up so fast. Okay, I ran up so fast. This was in 2011, the year before I left. Okay. This was like how God was preparing me.
Wow.
And John talks about it. I'm gonna mentor you. You can coach, speak, train on my content. And he's like, it costs $5,000. And listen, Ben, as a pastor, dude, $5,000 in 2011, that's big time.
Yeah.
That's big time, because I mean, I had zero confidence. I wasn't making a lot. Let's just say that was probably a little bit less than 10% of my income a year or something crazy, something crazy, right? So I basically listened and I'm like, that's it. I need to do this. So I told my wife, her first words were, that's a scam. Like, that's a scam. I Googled John Maxwell. This is a scam. You shouldn't do it. So then what do I do, Ben? What do you do? See, there's another one. There's these little micro choices.
Yes.
Where, I don't know, let's just say 80% of men would have been like, yeah, you're right. I mean, who wants to get on their wife's bad side?
Yeah. That's a dangerous game.
Yeah. So I thought about it, I prayed about it, and I'm like, Kelly, I just really feel like this is right. And then she's like, well, you can do it, but I don't think it's going to work. Dude, I went for it, man. I went for it. And I invested, and I took it so serious that I became like one of the top dudes. And so much so that within a year, their teammates, their legit C-suite team was saying, because I had written a few books by then, they're like, hey, will you help me write a book? And I'm like, really? See? I mean, this is how it happens, right? And so when Chet called me out, one of their dudes had just written me a check for a big amount of money to essentially publish and write his book. Is that crazy?
That is wild. All because of a $5,000 leap.
$5,000 leap. Dude, it turned into a ton. And then we started the publishing company. But then get this. This is how crazy it has been. You have a success and then you get shot to crud. Okay. So things are going great. I'm in the John Maxwell, right? And like John is like everybody's thinking I'm the golden boy. Then I get a letter from, not a letter, I get an email from their president. You're uninvited to the event. We're returning your money. You can't come. And I'm like, what the heck? What's going on? And again, I've never told this story, but he's gone now, so I can tell the story.
Yeah. Breaking news.
Breaking news. He's like, look, we think you're plagiarizing, some stuff. You're out. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Turns out this dude who's not with them anymore, because he was found out, had done this and has been doing it for several years, where anyone got too far, chopped him out, started a rumor, and they were out. So I basically got kicked out. Not really. And they've made reach out since then and actually hired me for book stuff. But like, that was a season, Ben, where my family, kicked me out. And so I had to be like, well, crud, I'm going to have to reinvent myself. And then I started a publishing company called Author Academy Elite. I mean, this is the story of my life, where it's like success, everything's ripped out. Success, everything.
I'm curious, going back to the theme of this idea of sacred cows. I mean, you were boom, 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 and maybe you didn't go up to the mountaintop and sacrifice, right? But like someone else decided to go up there.
Yeah.
How did you handle that? Actually, and even before that, what was it about the Maxwell group? What was said? Like, what was the nugget that made you just the light bulb turn on? Enough for you to keep going, so that when the rug got pulled out from underneath you, you just kept going.
I think it's the Matrix quote. He's starting to believe. When Neo's about to jump and or fight, he stops running from the agents. He stands and fights. And someone's like, what the heck? And Morpheus is like, he's starting to believe. I had started to believe. And I think when you start believing in yourself, not in an arrogant way, but when you're just like, man, I am closing my integrity gaps. I'm looking in the mirror, God, show me what I'm doing wrong. You become bulletproof. And you know how it is, man. Like, why do I work out? Why do I do these crazy cardio? Why do I go to France? It's all part of the equation. Why do you not hit snooze on your alarm? And again, I'm not judging anybody if that's your style, but I'm just saying, when you hit snooze on the alarm, you're breaking integrity. Like, just set the alarm later. Well, I wake up on the third alarm, or when somebody sees you, Ben, and they're like, we should do lunch, and you're like, we should. What I tell my students? I say, look, you either say, I can't make that commitment in my life right now, or you pull out your phone and say, let's schedule it.
Let's get it done.
Let's not do this whole, yeah, we should do that. Because when you make these covenants and small promises with yourself and don't fulfill it, you actually chip away your self-confidence.
And the visual I got in this whole thing listening to you was, I think belief is, in another word or way to describe it, is gaining self-love.
Whoa.
I think that entrepreneurism, and I wrote this in the book for Dan's 80th birthday.
Yeah.
That I think that entrepreneurism especially is the greatest form of self-love. Or at least the expression of self-love, because I think that
you're betting on yourself.
Yeah, you're betting on yourself. And when you love yourself, you have the capability to love others. It's like on the airplane, right? Put your mask on first before you help others. And I love this story, in terms of it's actually a love letter to yourself, in that as you have continued to grow, and let's face it, we've all been in this season of life where you look in the mirror, maybe gotten out of the shower, you look in the mirror and you go, I don't love what I'm seeing here, right? I think maybe I'm the only one.
So you have to make adjustments.
You have to make adjustments, and you have to decide. Right? I think the snooze button is really symbolic for
not getting after it,
but more of all the possibility, living in the possibility, so you don't have to decide.
You're delaying your future.
Yeah. So you parlay $5,000 into this whole new skill set that you didn't even know.
Yep.
You get the rug pulled out from underneath you.
Oh yeah.
What happens next?
What happens next is a gentleman named Dan Miller, who passed away 2 years ago, but he was a coach member. He tried it out. Dan wrote 48 Days of the Work You Love. And I read that book while I was a pastor, and it was actually what led me to think I could leave. And I reached out to him and I'm like, look, this is crazy, but I wrote this book called Day Job to Dream Job. I wrote it in Shawshank prison because this is a true story, in Ohio. And that's just how I am, because I was like, my next book, man, everyone's asking me, how'd you leave the pastorate? I'm like, it was my Shawshank. It really was my Shawshank. And then I had to create my Zihuatanejo. So I'm watching Shawshank. I'm like, this is my book. I got to write this book. So I Google, where is Shawshank? And it's like Ohio. And I'm not from Ohio, so I didn't know that. It's near where Evan Ryan grew up, Mansfield.
Oh, yes.
So I tell my wife, I'm like, can I go to Shawshank on Saturday? She's like, for what for? I'm like, I'm going to go and write in Andy's cell. She's like, how are you going to do that? I'm like, I don't know. I just feel like I'm supposed to go. So I drive up to Shawshank, and there's a gift shop, and I meet the young lady, and I say, look, this sounds weird, but I'm a writer. Can I get into Andy's cell to write this chapter of this book? She's like, Sure. Here's the Wi-Fi password. So I'm in Andy's cell writing the book, how he's leaving Shawshank. And then when I'm there, Ben, I get this vision, not a crazy vision, but I get this vision. I got to launch this book at Shawshank Prison next year. So I start talking to them at Shawshank, and I'm like, look, I think I'm supposed to launch this book at Shawshank. And they're like, well, we have a 20th reunion where the warden's coming back from the movie.
Oh my goodness.
And anyway, long story short, I added value to them enough that they wrote me into the events. And I had a church service that Sunday at Shawshank of the Hollywood reunion. And then I literally will show you later pictures of me and the warden launching my book, Day Job to Dream Job, at Shawshank. But the way this touches with Dan, prior to the book launch, a month before, I send Dan Miller and 7 other big people, hey, I'm launching my book at Shawshank. Will you come? I'll pay your way. I'd love for you to come. You've been a mentor to me. Even from afar, you might not know me. Dan's the only one. Get this. He opens the letter. You can't even make this up. His wife, her dad, was a prison guard.
No.
At Shawshank, at the Ohio State Reformatory. So he's like, this is crazy, Kary. Joanne's dad, who she was estranged from, so we're going to come. So Dan Miller and Joanne come, and I meet him for the first time. I give him a hug, and he became a mentor to me. And then when the John Maxwell team, nothing against John, it was not his fault. It was his president at the time. Anyway, Dan became like my next mentor, and Dan like gave me the gift of belief, opened me up to his tribe. We created an event called Shawshank Dream Job Boot Camp, where we would lock people in cells. I'm not even kidding, Ben. They'd come for 3 days. We'd teach them the skills on how to break free from their day job. And part of the exercise was we would lock them in a cell, and they would have to write a letter to their former stuck cell. And then they'd have to put their hands on the bars. Like, it's legit stuff, man. Like, there's pictures of this. Anyway, it turned into the publishing company, Author Academy Elite. In its heyday, we had 600 people at our annual events. They were flying in from Australia and the UK.
Oh my goodness.
But then COVID happened, and then God took that Igniting Souls tribe from me. Truly, I think it was another Abraham Isaac thing. And this is just my life, man. And then I had to close shop for those DIY authors. Some understood, but others were like, he's just part of Strategic Coach now. He doesn't care about us DIY authors. He just wants the big authors. I mean, this is the story, man.
It just represents all these microcosms, these little mini mountains, and not the mountain, the fact is I came, I conquered, but these mountains of emotional, building and then tearing down.
But don't you think we all have this journey if we have the eyes to see?
Yes.
Doesn't God want to write this story? And maybe he is in everybody, but a lot of people are just just give me the pill, man.
As Dan Sullivan is often prone to say, that all progress starts by telling the truth. I think back in your story, Jet said, hey, are you telling the truth to yourself, to others, to God? Right. And sometimes that truth is you have to sacrifice the thing that you most care about, or at least that you feels like it's the thing that you most care about. Which I actually think I think that's ego saying.
Well, listen, you when Benny passed, how many people? Well, I'll tell you, I think the divorce rate is around 80%.
Yeah.
People start blaming each other. This is your fault. This is your fault. Rather than growing closer together, which you guys are celebrating your new baby girl on July 4th. I'm so excited for you.
Yes.
But you could have became bitter. You could have said, screw you, God. We're done. I mean, there's things that less lesser things have caused people to give up on life.
Yeah.
And even if you had your seasons and months and weeks, that's fine. But like, you're here today.
Yeah, I think the thing for me um was that I felt like there was two paths. One path was I could go down the human condition, and the other path was I could go down and be most present for Benny. And I distinctly remember we had a moment where I felt this like really distinctly. I mean, it was like I could see it coming. I could see the potential for blame to come down this like path at us. Is that we had the genetic counselor, and again, just for those who don't know the story, love for you to hop over to 16days.org. You can hear the story. But my son Benny was diagnosed post birth with trisomy 18. It's a pretty incredible story, but to keep this short, when he was diagnosed 4 days after, where they had done a genetic test, they also took genetic tests from both Jenna and I to see in terms of, you know, what potentially where did this come from. And I distinctly remember as soon as it happened, they had all left the room looking to Jenna and saying, I want to be really clear. And I think that we should get on the same page that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where or how this came from, and that I love you, and that like Benny was a lottery. And I've actually come to the conclusion that Benny actually was the Powerball.
Wow. Ooh.
He has like, I mean, sure, would I've loved to have more time with him? Yeah, 100%. But Benny, he lived more in 16 days than I had in 42 years.
Mm.
And I had a friend of mine, Blake Hansen. He had written me in the midst of when we realized like there was a decision. And he said, he goes, God must really respect you. And I remember just going, "Ooh,
Yeah.
like I really got to think about that." And I and our friend who we've talked about, Daniel White. This is now like a almost year and a half later. He had said, he goes, he goes, God must have looked at you and Jenna that you had so much love in your hearts that he gifted you with Benny so that he could graduate. And that just, both those things really just stuck with me. And I think that that is actually what allowed Jen and I to be in it and in the seasons. I used to think that grief was like, oh, don't want grief. And what I've realized that grief is literally the beginning of joy. Like you can't have intense sorrow without the equal and opposite reaction. And so when I have those moments, and like I'll be the guy who's on the plane flying home from somewhere, and it's usually in the morning because I live in central Wisconsin. So you always got to leave super early, and I'll see a beautiful sunrise, and it will make me think of him, and I'll just but I used to be like, oh, I'm not gonna let my tears flow, and I'm like, I'm letting it happen because that's being authentic, and it's also allowing me to realize that like I feel him living.
It's powerful.
And so, but you're right. It could have easily gone down the road of blame. And
No, yeah.
Jenna and I are, I think, more in love now than we were before.
Wow.
So,
Well, I'll let you keep going, but we do have to end in a little bit because I want to talk to you offline.
yeah.
For a few minutes because I got to give a shout out to Ben. Ben is an amazing coach. He's got a gift, and he's just, you know, you gave me a gift of belief when I was in 10X,
Oh,
and I was thinking about free zone, and you come up to me and you're like, dude, you totally should be in free zone. Like, you need to step up. You're in the next group, man. And I was like, seriously? I mean, you were, remember this?
Yeah.
That was the time. Then I went back to the back room and I'm like, I'm in. And then it was like that meeting.
Yeah. You haven't looked back. I'm convinced that everyone has a sunrise. And when you think of a sunrise, most people, if you've ever seen a sunrise like on a coast, is that about 45 minutes before the sun actually rises, you start to see color. And I think that's where most people live, in that periphery. You get to see the color, but you actually don't get to see the sunrise. And yeah, I think that, Kary, as we kind of think about wrapping this up here, what are the things that you think that someone who's maybe having maybe a little bit more self-reflection on their journey now? I mean, I've heard you talk about books. I've heard you talk about like mentors.
Yeah.
Like, what are the top 3 things that you think someone could gain from your experience, that if you could tell your former self, if you could go back to your 22-year-old self, you would say, hey, if you follow these things, you'll go exponentially faster?
So one, I think, just based on today, is pain is inevitable, misery is a choice. And by that, I mean choose acute pain. So you can be like everybody else and choose the chronic pain, because life does include pain. Just step outside, you'll see rain, you'll see traffic, you'll see violence. So it's like, choose acute pain. I'd say that's number 1. I'd say number 2, I'm going to borrow Ryan Holiday, who borrowed it from Marcus Aurelius. But Marcus Aurelius literally said, what stands in the way becomes the way. Ryan Holiday made it the obstacle is the way. But let's take Marcus Aurelius. What stands in the way becomes the way. So like, the thing that you're resisting, the thing that I'm resisting, is actually the way forward. And the more we try to go around it, look at the Israelites, 40 years, man. Like, you can wander, but you still got to face the lesson. And then number 3, I like do hard things. And what I mean by that is, I was up at 5:27, not just up. I was already working out at 5:27. You know, I did not want to work, but there was a small group of guys, and they're older than me. And like, I've tried to been teaching my son this, because we're at this dude's house, Lee Benson, and there's this cold plunge pool. And Keegan's like, man, I think I want to do that, but I don't really want to.
Yes.
And I had done it last time I was at Lee's. And I'm like, come on, man, we got to do this. And so we did the whole cold plunge. And you're building a core muscle, metaphorically speaking, that uncomfortability is not bad.
Yes.
And I think as Americans, as whatever, we get this point where it's like, being uncomfortable is bad. But I think that you just said, if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change.
Yeah. I love that. Well, Kary, I want to thank you for being on the podcast today. I want to thank you for sharing fearlessly and so openly and so authentically. I got chills throughout some of your stories, and I just thank you for blessing us, and I really appreciate you being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
Thank you for listening. A big thanks to Elation Lab for the production and creative design. Remember to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Keep listening for more Max Life.